Hello, musical humans. I am Robert from A&G Central Music, and this is a video about metal. Okay, gang, today we're going to do something a little bit different. This is a time of year where in Michigan, many students are preparing to play a solo or in a small ensemble. And we often get asked the question from students and from parents, what's the difference between a student instrument and an intermediate instrument and a step-up instrument? And so this is the first in a series of 3 videos where we're going to discuss some of these differences. Differences in materials, differences in craftsmanship, and differences in features and how that benefits the player. So for today's video, we're going to talk about the materials that instruments are made out of. We're going to talk about metals, and we're going to talk about woods. So let's get started. The first material that we're going to talk about today is brass, and that's because it is perhaps the most widely used material in musical instrument building. All of the saxophones in the woodwind family are made from brass, as are some contralto clarinets and even a lot of components of bass clarinets. And then of course we have the brass family, which is the trumpet all the way up to the tuba. All of those instruments are also made of brass, but all brass is not created equal. So today we're going to discuss a little bit about the different types of brass used in these instruments. Let's start with what we call yellow brass, as you can see in this nice Jupiter student trombone. This brass can be very hard, which is good for building student instruments, as our younger students are just learning to properly handle their instruments, so they need something that's extremely durable. But the harder the brass is, the more energy it takes to produce a good sound on that, which is why we have another type of brass, which is commonly referred to as gold brass or red brass. And that you can see in the bell of this beautiful con trombone. This brass is quite a bit softer and allows the instrument to produce a much fuller, richer tone and provides a better playing experience for the player. You can also see the difference here in a yellow brass Selmer saxophone and a gold brass Yamaha saxophone. Typically we see the gold brass or red brass being used in step-up or professional instruments, and hard yellow brass being used mostly in student instruments. But Robert, aren't a lot of professional brass instruments made of silver, you ask? Well, you're kind of right. As we know, if we leave brass out in the air, it will tarnish, sometimes turn green. Not very attractive on your musical instrument, right? So what we do is we put lacquer over the brass instrument. That keeps it from tarnishing. It also gives it that shiny, durable finish that we like on a musical instrument. But for a lot of instruments like the trumpet, where we want a really bright, brassy sound, sometimes that lacquer can be enough to darken the tone of the instrument to where we don't really care for it. So on instruments like this trumpet, we've left the lacquer off and we've put a silver plating on it. And as you know, silver is a very malleable metal. So if it colors the sound of the instrument at all, it will color it to the bright side, not the dark side, which is a tone that perhaps we want for a trumpet. We also see it sometimes on saxophones, trombones, and even tubas. But that's just a silver plating. The base metal here on this particular instrument, as it is a more professional instrument, is still a softer brass. Now let's move on and talk about the use of wood in musical instruments. And we'll start with the woodwind instruments because that seems obvious. The clarinet, oboe, bassoon, even bass clarinets are typically made of wood. However, our student versions of those instruments are made of a resin or an ABS plastic. And much like the use of hard yellow brass in the student saxophones or trumpets, the plastic that we use in student clarinets and oboes and bassoons is mainly a reflection of the need to have a durable instrument. But when we're really looking for the best sound in a woodwind instrument, we're going to make it out of wood, as it's a porous and slightly softer material, and it just creates a much richer, fuller tone. The other class of instruments that uses wood is very obviously the string family. Our violins, violas, cellos, and basses. And really, in construction and the use of wood, there's one basic difference between the student and the professional. In our bass student instruments, we're often dealing with a laminated instrument. I joke with parents sometimes that string instruments are like kitchen cabinets. Your cheap ones are a veneer of good-looking wood with just any kind of basic old, maybe not that attractive wood underneath. Well, some bass student model cellos, basses, and violins and violas are built the same way. It's a pretty veneer of wood on top of a pressed formed wood underneath, okay? These are durable and have the advantage of being less expensive. However, for the best tone, we want fully carved spruce tops on our string instruments, and then maple for the back and sides. All of the black portions that you see on the instruments, like the pegs, the fingerboard, and the tailpiece, are made typically from ebony. It's not always easy to tell just by looking at a stringed instrument whether it is laminated or whether it is a hand-carved solid wood instrument. As we look at this laminated violin, it does have some characteristics that we often find in a laminated instrument, and that is that the finish on it is very, very shiny. It almost looks like it's been lacquered, and the grain in the wood is not super evident. Now, as we move and we look at this solid carved viola, the first thing we notice, other than the color, is that the grain in the wood stands out quite a bit more. And as we look at the back of this viola, it brings up the last point I want to make about the wooden construction on these instruments, which is there are grades of wood that we use. An intermediate instrument would not have the same grade of wood as a professional instrument on a stringed instrument. And as you can see, there's a very beautiful, what we call flaming, in the grain on this instrument, which would indicate that it is a high quality viola. Now, while all of the things that we talked about here aren't 100% true for every instrument, I hope that this gives you a good general idea of the differences in the materials and how they make a huge difference in the sound and the experience of playing an instrument, from a student instrument to a professional instrument. If you liked this video and found it useful, like, comment, or subscribe, and stay tuned. There's 2 more videos left in this series. We'll see you all very soon.